Not being particularly scholarly, the thoughts that I share with people, the blogs that I write, and the podcasts that I'm recording tend not to rely on cutting-edge science or the findings of specific studies. Nothing discussed here relies on a lofty education or comprehensive knowledge of relevant literature. All we need is a skeptical and inquiring mind. Science is wonderful, obviously, but it's not the only way to know things. Without any direct experience of the conversation topic, considering things purely rationally and logically can also be illuminating. Philosophers call these kinds of inferences a priori, which just means without prior experience. And these so-called a priori deductions can be reached by anyone sitting in any reception area of any Auckland mechanics, say. A few years ago, while waiting for my car to pass its warrant of fitness, or MOT if you're listening in the UK, I accidentally fell into a debate with myself over the usefulness of prayer. This is exactly the kind of thing that can be investigated purely by mulling it over. As science is limited, hopelessly shackled to material reality, many supernatural claims and religious tenets need to be justified a priori. So, with nothing better to do than sit and wait and worry about how I might be preyed upon, thanks to my total ignorance of cars and engines, I thought I'd take some notes and hash out how I felt about prayer. Though, not unlike my car, my own personal philosophies have been known to backfire. Throughout my late teens and early 20s, I found myself drifting away from the Christian faith of my family. Amongst the biggest challenges to my faith had arisen from conflicts around the supposed attributes of God. These are traditionally that God is all-powerful or omnipotent, all-knowing or omniscient, all-loving or omnibenevolent, and that he's everywhere, all at once, all the time, or omnipresent. From all of these layers of maximal perfectness, it of course follows that your goals and intentions, in short your plan, is faultless. How could it be otherwise? Preserving ambiguous and vague notions of a nondescript creative force behind the universe are the only way to keep God unfalsifiable. As soon as you go out on a limb to say something definite about God's nature or character, your picture of God can be rebutted. The more layers of perfection we cloak our Creator in, the more paradoxes have to be resolved. Pressing our hands together in prayer prepares us to dive into one of these deep dilemmas. And please forgive the patriarchal engendering of a disembodied supernatural mind here. Old habits die hard. If God is all-knowing, he can see the future. He already knows the choices he will have to face. He knows the precise number and nature of interventions that he will need to stage. He will know the grovelling favours that he will be pestered with, and, of course, every response that he will issue in return. He would have been fully aware of all of these things and their inevitable outcomes well before the creation of the universe. Because of this perfect knowledge, it follows that God cannot change his mind at any point or in any way, ever. This immovability would seem to contradict God's all-powerful side, and it doesn't allow prayer very much wiggle room. Complete and total knowledge of the future leaves our Creator incapable of straying from a single perfect path. If a holy decision could be made on the fly, then whatever reason he had just found to reassess must have been unforeseeable. This would lead us to doubt his omniscience, his power, and his plan. It follows then that anyone who prays for a change in their circumstances, or the circumstances of others, must believe that God has overlooked something, made a mistake, or in some way needs advice on running the show. If not, on what grounds could a person's personal request be granted? As a species, we continue to issue our long-anticipated prayers from every corner of the globe, even though each one implies that nobody with a faultless plan is actually in charge. This opens up and frankly drop-kicks a new can of worms: the squirming issue of humanity's free will. If God knows what we're going to do before we do it, what possible freedom can we claim over our actions? To be knowable, even in a supernatural sense, all of our actions must be predetermined. This is definitely an issue that I'm looking forward to addressing from an atheistic, humanistic perspective in upcoming podcasts. For now, in accepting God's omniscience, it's possible to reach the conclusion that free will might just be a very convincing illusion from a strictly theistic route. Under these circumstances, it seems fair to ask, if life's ultimate outcome is guaranteed and known, what need is there for the real-time continuum of our existence? Why play the game when its ultimate victors have already been decided? I'm not God, as many of my friends and family will attest, but I'd consider it merciful to skip the pantomime of human experience if our future were already set in stone. I would gladly just jump ahead to the credits if it meant sparing billions of humans and animals the pain and misery of simply going through the motions of living. Free will only provides a solution at the expense of God's omniscience. He can be maximally knowing without being all-knowing. In either case, it must be reassuring to believe that God still has a plan, especially when calamity strikes. Why this plan should involve black ice on the roads, unexpected redundancies, and slow wasting diseases is a question for the boss himself, and perhaps for a future podcast. Yet, if God is perfect, omnipotent, and has it all sketched out, and if that plan requires that my car fail its exam, why bother praying for anything different? I can't expect God to make any alterations on my behalf. Nor should I. With no new information to offer the Almighty, granting me special treatment could hardly be fair. More than this, I'd think that asking God to deviate from his impeccable plan must come across profoundly naive or even outright blasphemous. To redeem the integrity of prayer, we'd need to find some indication that an existential script was not being followed. At least, not to the letter. In this respect, the Christian Bible really is good news. Right at the top, we find Adam and Eve feasting from the tree of knowledge while God watches on, silently judging. His lack of intervention during this original sin debacle suggests that humanity's fallen, wicked nature was part of God's design all along. This doesn't shine a very moral light on our Creator, but the alternative, that his plan went pear-shaped from a bite of forbidden fruit, crucifies God's omniscience afresh. It does, however, put the effectiveness of prayer back on the cards as a logical possibility. There are other reasons to believe that the divine plan isn't so watertight. At one point, God is said to have wiped out most of humanity in a flood of, biblical proportions. He claims to have done this to purge the sinful. But as sin has evidently returned, either God's holy genocide was ineffective, or he never intended to end corruption and violence like he said. Decide for yourself. It's also prophesied that Jesus will return someday, presumably to do something that he couldn't do, or didn't think to do, the first time. Scriptural accounts of God rewriting the program gives us hope that prayers might get factored in. Although, if the desperate cries of the millions whom God drowned could be willfully ignored, I doubt he'll lift a finger to fix my car. There's always the possibility that God just likes to hear from us. Perhaps he enjoys the torrent of junk mail that he receives every second through prayers. Would an omniscient and omnipotent manifestation of perfect love require daily validation from his wayward children? Faith and our convictions are either enough to save us or they're not. Routine thanks and praise can't count for much. Still, if we grant that prayer works, just to keep the conversation moving, the paradoxes don't go away. For example, the faithful will often pray for a terminally ill person to recover. At first, this seems like a lovely thing to do. But eternal salvation or damnation will arrive at some point, whether or not the patient miraculously improves. Death will find them eventually. Judgment will come. Now, for an unequivocally evil person, or a misguided follower of a false religion, it could be argued that more time on earth allows extra opportunity to make amends. Praying for truly awful people to recover in this way could therefore serve quite a charitable purpose. However, if the afflicted is already on God's good side, extra time in this gauntlet of sin keeps their soul in immortal danger, which is a terrible thing to wish upon someone so nice. When prayer fails, deathbed repentance becomes increasingly attractive. This, too, feels a bit dodgy to me. Any God who would reward cowardice and conversions of convenience while punishing the honestly unconvinced doesn't appear particularly just. But who am I to judge? As long as prayers aren't standing in for actually doing good deeds in the world, you do you. As I see it, there's a real danger that people who pray feel like they've done something constructive to help, as if a prayer is equal to actually assisting people in need. Sending money, food, or offering your time is infinitely more useful than praying for someone, then ticking them off your sympathy list. The temptation for people to mistake prayer for aid must be a problem that God is well aware of. If praying to a deity on behalf of somebody else had any real data to back it up, then I needn't be so worried. If the idea was supported empirically, imagine all the good we could do without leaving the house. As things stand, a world leader who is content to just pray for lower carbon emissions, a stronger economy, and more fish in the sea would be rightly labelled a maniac. Yet, if God plays a central role in the day-to-day running of our universe, regularly tweaking people's lives, there must be some clue out there that we can science. A logical first step might be to look for the effects of prayer on health. As you might expect, double-blind studies consistently show that prayers do not heal the sick. They just don't. Atheists are every bit as afflicted and recover to the same extent and in the same proportions as any devout religious folk. So what if we amplify our voice, pleading en masse as we do for the cessation of wildfires, oil spills, terrorist attacks, wars, and global pandemics? When millions of people collectively pray for the same thing, we'd expect some experimentally verifiable supernatural response. Again, nothing. Events always proceed exactly as we would predict in the absence of any divine intervention. The same is true of revelation. Despite frequent accounts of God directly communicating with his followers, nobody has ever possessed knowledge that would be unattainable except through supernatural means. This is to say that no mystical experiences divulge information that a person could not have guessed or fabricated or learned by some natural insight. Religions are rooted in three basic human needs: to control ourselves, to give life meaning, and to console each other. Predictably then, when faith trumps facts, superstitious thinking distorts all areas of life. It produces a worldview where ideas are formed with great passion, but a recklessly malleable standard of evidence. Even when we have sound, verifiable reasons, a posteriori, to support our beliefs, lines of evidence that come from observations and causes and experiences rather than theoretical deductions, mistakes can still be made. This is precisely why we must question what we accept as truth. To help us make better decisions, handle the chaos of our lives, and resist people taking advantage of us, we need to make sure any reasons we have for our beliefs are good ones. Given all that we have just discussed, I'm still not convinced that prayer is completely useless. The placebo effect is a powerful force with plenty of experimental backing. Communal sympathies for the sick really do give people strength. Public displays of compassion, adhering to our moral responsibilities, and the sensation of inclusion that people get by praying each provide subjective rewards. These perks come purely from belief, whether or not a God actually exists to return our calls. It really is the thought that counts, though the benefits are personal. Contributions as minor as uttered words do more for people's self-esteem than powerless inaction. It hardly matters that nothing has changed in reality. Continuously reinforcing your own beliefs in this way can even be therapeutic. Think about how good it feels to moan about your problems to a friend on the phone. A response from them isn't strictly necessary. Just knowing that someone is there for you and listening makes you feel better. If you're anything like me, thinking out loud helps to find a solution too, without needing feedback from whoever you're talking to. We figure things out by talking to ourselves, and if not, listening to our thoughts can give us peace, clarity, and crystallize our stance on any given issue. That's why I'm still stood here recording these podcasts, despite crashingly low online views, in case you were wondering. Problems arise and persist when you lean too heavily on God. Like sitting in a waiting room praying for your car to be fixed, imagining that someone else has ultimate control over your life keeps you trapped. It's up to us, and no one else, to correct the mistakes that we make and stop them from happening again. Forwarding our issues to God's inbox has never solved anything. To save ourselves, each other, and this whole crumbling planet, we have to recognize that we did this. We got ourselves into this mess, and we alone have the power to sort it out without any supernatural intervention at all. Can I get an amen? If nothing else, let this episode serve as a primer for next episode, where we're going to be looking at cognitive dissonance. This is the very human tendency to wholeheartedly believe two completely contradictory things at the same time.